3 minutes ago, the palace was shaken by a thunderclap. King Charles, frail yet unyielding, has delivered a final warning to Queen Camilla, and at the heart of this explosive confrontation lies Catherine. For years, whispers of rivalry simmered behind gilded doors, but never before has the king dared to draw such a line. What did Charles say that left Camilla trembling, and why is Catherine at the center of this dangerous royal storm? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace was one of disbelief. Courtiers who had witnessed countless disputes and private quarrels were left speechless as Charles, with a voice sharper than it had been in years, warned Camilla that her conduct had gone too far. His words were not whispered in secrecy or cloaked in polite phrasing. They were direct, final, and filled with the weight of a monarch whose patience had been shattered. This was not the quiet, contemplative Charles the staff had grown accustomed to, but a man who had reached the very edge of endurance. The warning was a dagger drawn, cutting through decades of suppressed tension. Camilla, who had always thrived on subtle maneuvering and quiet dominance, appeared visibly shaken. Her face betrayed what she tried so desperately to conceal in shock that Charles would dare to stand against her in such a way, and worse, in front of those who had always seen her as untouchable. To be blindsided publicly, with Catherine's name invoked as the spark of the king's fury, was a humiliation she had never imagined. Those who witnessed it knew at once. The monarchy was entering uncharted territory. For Catherine, the warning carried both risk and revelation. She had long endured the shadow games, the whispered insults, and the undermining glances of a woman determined to keep her in her place. But never before had Charles openly declared his loyalty to her in such a dramatic way. His words, sharp as steel, revealed what he had kept hidden for too long, that Catherine was no longer just a future queen consort, but the very pillar upon which the monarchy's survival now rested. The warning itself was steeped in symbolism. Charles spoke not only as a husband or father, but as a king whose reign was running short, whose health whispered of fragility, and whose legacy was now on trial. The frailty in his body seemed to give way to an iron in his voice, one that carried the authority of centuries. He was reminding Camilla, and the world by extension, that loyalty to the crown would always outweigh personal ambition. Catherine's name, spoken in that fiery moment, was not merely a defense of a daughter-in-law, it was a declaration that the future of the monarchy could not be jeopardized by internal strife. As the warning rang through the palace halls, the old, long-buried fissures split wide open. Decades of uneasy compromises, quiet betrayals, and silent endurance erupted into the open. The courtiers felt it in their bones. This was not an ordinary dispute between husband and wife. This was a fracture that carried the power to reshape the monarchy forever. For the first time, Charles had chosen to fight not with diplomacy, but with finality. And in doing so, he had drawn a line that could not be erased. And yet, to understand why Charles risked everything with this final threat, we must revisit the dark undercurrents that have haunted his marriage from the very beginning. Behind the smiles and staged photographs, Camilla's shadow has loomed over Catherine since her very first day as a royal. Whispered dismissals, strategic exclusions, and private humiliations, Camilla's subtle campaign has tested Catherine in ways the public never fully grasped. But now, with Charles's health failing, the power struggle has reached its most dangerous point. From the very beginning, Catherine walked into a world already divided. A palace where allegiances were carefully drawn and old scars never fully healed. Camilla, though outwardly cordial, made it clear through small but piercing gestures that Catherine was not to be considered her equal. A dismissive glance here, a withheld word of support there, all carefully calculated to remind the younger woman that she was an outsider in a world Camilla had fought ruthlessly to enter. For Catherine, these early years were not just about adjusting to royal duty, but about surviving in an atmosphere laced with quiet hostility. What made the hostility all the more cutting was the undeniable truth. Catherine's star was rising while Camilla's dimmed. Every public engagement Catherine attended, every charitable cause she championed, drew admiration and devotion from the people. In her grace, her elegance, and her calm composure, many saw echoes of Diana, an unbearable comparison for Camilla, who had once been branded the interloper in that tragic story. As Catherine became a beloved figure not only in Britain, but across the world, Camilla's jealousy turned sharper, though she disguised it with the polish of a seasoned court player. Yet Catherine did not respond in kind. She chose dignity over retaliation, silence over scandal. Where Camilla maneuvered with sharp whispers and deliberate coldness, Catherine endured with patience, believing that resilience would ultimately outshine bitterness. It was this quiet endurance that gave her strength, and though she never sought to fight Camilla openly, her unspoken defiance grew stronger with each attempt to diminish her. The palace walls may have absorbed their unspoken battles, but the people outside saw only Catherine's unwavering poise, a contrast that made Camilla's efforts look petty in comparison. Public opinion became an unstoppable tide. While Catherine's image solidified as the steady hand guiding the monarchy into the future, Camilla's reputation remained fragile. The whispers of discontent from the public became more pronounced as Catherine's popularity surged. Every headline, every wave of admiration for Catherine, further hardened the perception that Camilla could never truly capture the people's hearts. What had started as a personal rivalry had now spilled into the realm of perception and power, a battleground where Catherine emerged stronger each passing year. Charles, meanwhile, stood silently between them. He was both mediator and captive of the conflict, unwilling to inflame Camilla, but increasingly aware of the deepening cracks. His silence, meant to preserve peace, only allowed resentment to fester. He watched as his wife's jealousy collided with his daughter-in-law's dignity, unable or perhaps unwilling to step in. But silence can only stretch so far before it breaks, and deep within him, the seeds of frustration begin to grow. And as those seeds took root, the storm that now engulfs the monarchy became inevitable. For every whispered slight and every cold dismissal Catherine endured, a line was being drawn. It was only a matter of time before Charles would be forced to choose, and his frustration with Camilla would become impossible to ignore. For a monarch known for restraint, the breaking point came like fire through dry grass. Charles, weakened by health battles yet emboldened by fear of losing his legacy, reached a point where Camilla's defiance could no longer be excused. His warning wasn't just personal, it was political, and it carried the full weight of the crown. For years, Charles had endured a delicate balancing act, holding together a fragile peace between his wife and the woman destined to be queen consort. He tried to remain above the fray, ignoring the whispers and swallowing the frustration that came with Camilla's constant attempts to undermine Catherine. But illness has a way of stripping away patience. As his health faltered, the urgency of legacy sharpened every choice he made. He could no longer afford to remain silent, no longer pretend that the cracks in his marriage would heal themselves. Each day brought the heavy reminder that time was no longer his ally, and if he did not act now, his reign could be remembered not for its unity, but for its chaos. Palace insiders, long accustomed to Charles's cautious temperament, were stunned to witness his sudden burst of fury. They described it as uncharacteristic and unfiltered, the kind of raw emotion he had spent a lifetime concealing. This was not the gentle man of duty, who had quietly carried burdens on his shoulders. This was a king fighting to hold together an institution slipping through his fingers. His voice, once restrained, now carried the weight of fire and thunder, a fury directed not only at Camilla but at the threat she posed to the monarchy itself. For beneath the personal tension lay something even darker, the realization that Camilla's defiance had grown into a destabilizing force. Every slight toward Catherine, every calculated insult, rippled far beyond palace walls. Public confidence wavered, whispers of division grew louder, and the monarchy's carefully curated image began to fracture. To Charles, this was not just a marital conflict. It was the unraveling of the very institution he had sworn to protect. And he knew that if he failed to control it, history would remember him as the king who let the crown be weakened from within. His resolve was strengthened by a singular obsession: Catherine's place in royal history. In her, he saw not just William's wife, but the embodiment of the monarchy's future. She represented continuity, stability, and the people's affection. To allow Camilla's hostility to eclipse, Catherine was to endanger the survival of the crown itself. Charles understood that his legacy would not be defined by his own achievements, but by the strength of the monarchy he left behind. And that meant protecting Catherine at all costs. The path to this breaking point was paved with private clashes, each one more volatile than the last. Quiet confrontations between husband and wife escalated into bitter arguments behind gilded doors, the kind of fights that echoed through hallways long after voices fell silent. Advisors whispered about the growing tension, fearing that one day it would spill into the open. That day arrived when Charles, consumed by both anger and urgency, finally unleashed the words Camilla never expected to hear, a warning that cut deeper than any wound she had inflicted on Catherine. What made his fury all the more powerful was the awareness gnawing at him that time was running out. With each passing month, his strength waned, his reign shortened by shadows of illness. The clock was ticking not just on his health, but on his ability to secure the monarchy's survival. That urgency transformed his warning from a private quarrel into a royal decree, one that reverberated far beyond the palace walls. But what exactly triggered Charles's final warning? The answer lies in a chilling act of betrayal that Catherine herself could no longer ignore. The world saw only polished smiles, but behind closed doors, Catherine endured a humiliation so severe it nearly shattered her. And it was no accident. Camilla orchestrated it, pushing boundaries until the king himself could no longer deny her cruelty. That was the spark that ignited his explosive warning. It happened during a key royal event, one meant to showcase unity at a time when the monarchy desperately needed to project strength. Cameras captured a picture of harmony, but those present behind the scenes saw a different story unfold. Camilla, determined to remind Catherine of her place, orchestrated a moment designed to wound. Subtle in its execution but brutal in its intent, she delivered remarks that left the room tense, staff members stunned, and Catherine herself holding her composure with the strength of iron. What the public saw, as a fleeting smile, masked an injury that cut deep, one that could not be erased with protocol or courtesy. When details of the incident leaked through hushed whispers among palace aides, the shock was immediate. Words that should never have been spoken were repeated with disbelief. Staff members appalled that such cruelty could come from a queen consort. It wasn't just a personal jab, it was a calculated strike in a silent war, one aimed at undermining Catherine's very dignity. Those who had once dismissed talk of rivalry could no longer deny it. The humiliation was real, and its cruelty undeniable. Catherine, however, responded with her familiar armor, composure. She stood tall, her grace unbroken, her silence speaking louder than any retort. But behind that calm exterior, the pain weighed heavily. Those closest to her saw the toll it took, the quiet moments where her eyes betrayed the sorrow of a woman forced to endure attacks she could never publicly acknowledge. It was a burden she bore alone, determined not to let the public see her wounded, and in that resilience, she won even more admiration from the people who saw in her a reflection of endurance and quiet strength. In contrast, Camilla's coldness became all the more glaring. As Catherine's quiet suffering inspired sympathy and respect, Camilla's actions only deepened the chasm between her and the public. To many, it seemed she had revealed her true self, a woman willing to wound in private, even while pretending loyalty in public. The comparisons were inevitable. Catherine as the embodiment of grace, Camilla as the source of bitterness. For Charles, the event became an undeniable revelation. He had long balanced the private tensions within his marriage, but to see Catherine humiliated so openly, and to witness the aftermath of his wife's cruelty, broke the dam of silence he had held for too long. The incident stripped away any excuse he could cling to, any pretense that Camilla's rivalry with Catherine was harmless. At that moment, Charles saw not only a personal betrayal, but a threat to the very future of the crown. This was the trigger, the moment that transformed simmering frustration into unrestrained fury. His warning to Camilla was not born of sudden impulse. It was forged in the fire of Catherine's humiliation, sharpened by the undeniable truth that the monarchy itself was at risk. What Camilla saw as a victory had become her undoing, pushing Charles into a stance from which he could never retreat. And yet, if Charles believed this warning would end the battle, he was mistaken, because Camilla has never accepted defeat quietly. The warning may have silenced the palace for a moment, but Camilla's fury was swift and volcanic. Those close to her describe a queen enraged, plotting her next move with the precision of a woman who refuses to be sidelined. And at the heart of her anger, the young woman has always resented Catherine. Behind closed doors, Camilla's rage was said to be uncontainable. Those within her inner circle witnessed the eruption, the sharp words, and the storm of bitterness that followed Charles's final warning. To Camilla, this was more than a marital dispute. It was a humiliation, a public stripping of power that she had spent decades consolidating. The idea that Catherine, once an outsider, now stood as the figure Charles openly defended was intolerable. For Camilla, it was betrayal from both sides. Her husband had humiliated her, and Catherine had triumphed by doing nothing at all. Her fury grew into something darker, something sharper. She would not accept Charles's decision as final, nor would she yield her position to Catherine's silent strength. Instead, she began to plot with the cool calculation of a woman who understood that influence is not always wielded in the open. Whispered threats within her private circle painted a picture of revenge, of subtle strikes aimed not just at Catherine, but at the stability of the monarchy itself. For Camilla, the game was far from over. It was only the beginning. Those whispers soon carried into the wider palace, infecting the atmosphere with unease. Could Camilla strike back politically? Some believed she might use her connections to undermine Catherine's influence in the public eye, while others feared she would attempt to sway Charles through guilt and manipulation. Whatever her strategy, one truth was clear. Camilla was not ready to be silenced. Her refusal to accept defeat left the royal household in a state of perpetual tension, where every word, every gesture, felt like the opening move of a larger war. The gulf between husband and wife widened with every passing day. Where once Charles had sought compromise, now his patience was gone. Where Camilla once relied on his indulgence, she now faced his unyielding disapproval. Their marriage, already burdened by decades of history, strained under the weight of this confrontation. What had begun as a single warning was now spiraling into something far more dangerous, a standoff that threatened not only their relationship, but the very foundation of the monarchy. And yet, even in her fury, Camilla miscalculated the power of Catherine's silence. She believed rage and retaliation could restore her dominance, but Catherine's quiet composure only sharpened the contrast between them. While Camilla appeared consumed by anger, Catherine radiated calm resilience, a difference that did not go unnoticed by Charles or the public. The palace may have trembled under the weight of Camilla's wrath, but the tide of loyalty was shifting elsewhere. The tension boiled like a fire with no release, a dangerous standoff with no clear end in sight. Charles's warning had set the stage, Camilla's fury had escalated it, and now the palace braced itself for what would come next. But as Camilla sharpened her claws, Catherine made a quiet yet devastating move that would shift the balance entirely. While Camilla lashed out, Catherine's strength came not from rage but from silence. Her quiet dignity, her ability to endure storms without breaking, became her greatest weapon. And it was this unshakable composure that finally convinced Charles where his loyalty must lie. In the aftermath of the king's warning, many expected Catherine to retaliate, to rise against the humiliation and cruelty she had endured. But she did not. Instead, she chose restraint, an almost regal silence that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. Her calmness became a mirror, reflecting Camilla's volatility and exposing the fragility behind the queen consort's anger. It was Catherine's refusal to lower herself into open confrontation that turned the tide of perception. The contrast was undeniable, one woman raging, the other enduring. And in that contrast, the people found their true queen. Public admiration swelled with every passing day. Support for Catherine spread far beyond the palace walls, carried by whispers, conversations, and headlines that celebrated her resilience. She was seen not as a victim but as a figure of quiet strength, embodying the qualities the nation longed to see in its future queen. For those who had once admired Diana, Catherine became the natural heir to her legacy of compassion and grace. Where Camilla's outbursts revealed weakness, Catherine's endurance displayed unshakable resolve. This was more than public sympathy, it was symbolism. Catherine became the image of stability in a monarchy racked by division. She did not need to fight for the title of people's queen. The people gave it to her willingly. Her silence became a crown in itself, invisible yet powerful, lifting her above the chaos that threatened to consume the family. And for Charles, that symbolism could not be ignored. For a man who had spent his life balancing private desire with public duty, Catherine's composure carried a weight that shook him to his core. He saw in her the resilience that could outlast fury, the steadiness that could weather storms he himself could not control. Where Camilla's wrath seemed to corrode the very foundations of the monarchy, Catherine's stillness restored them. In her silence, Charles heard strength. In her dignity, he found hope. And in her endurance, he saw the future he wished to leave behind. This realization deepened Catherine's place in Charles's heart. No longer was she merely his son's wife. She became the linchpin of his vision for the crown. The loyalty he extended to her in his warning was not a fleeting impulse, but a decision forged by years of watching her endure with grace. Catherine had emerged not only unbroken but stronger, and Charles, faced with dwindling time and fragile health, knew he had to safeguard her role at all costs. The palace may have been divided, the marriage fractured, but in the silent power of Catherine, Charles glimpsed a way forward. A monarchy built not on fury or rivalry, but on strength that does not waver under attack. Her silence had spoken louder than Camilla's rage, and it was a message Charles could no longer ignore. Yet for Charles, this was not just about loyalty, it was about legacy, and the monarchy's survival hung in the balance. A monarch nearing the twilight of his reign faces a haunting question: what will he leave behind? For Charles, the answer became clear. His legacy would not be secured by Camilla, but by Catherine. And with that realization, his final warning became not just a message to his wife, but a declaration to history. Charles had always been consumed by questions of legacy. Every decision, every speech, every carefully staged appearance was made with the knowledge that history would one day write his chapter. But the older he grew, and the weaker his body became, the sharper that obsession cut into him. He could no longer afford hesitation. Every move mattered. He was not merely a king governing the present, he was a monarch, desperate to safeguard the future. And in that desperate calculation, Camilla no longer had a place. Catherine, in contrast, became the living symbol of everything Charles wished to bequeath to the nation. She was poised, beloved, and untarnished by scandal. The public saw in her not just a future queen but the embodiment of stability in uncertain times. To Charles, Catherine's resilience represented continuity, the thread that would carry the monarchy safely into the next era. It was she, not Camilla, who could secure the crown's survival long after his reign faded into memory. This realization cast Camilla in a far darker light. She was no longer merely a difficult partner or a rival figure. She was a threat to the monarchy's stability. Every outburst, every act of cruelty against Catherine weakened the image of unity the crown so desperately needed. To Charles, her defiance was not just a personal failing but a danger to the very institution he had sworn to protect. He could not allow his reign to be remembered for indulgence in private battles while the monarchy crumbled in public. And so, for the first time, Charles made a choice that placed the throne above his marriage. His loyalty shifted not out of affection, but out of necessity. He knew the monarchy's survival depended on Catherine's strength, not Camilla's wrath. In siding with Catherine, Charles was sending a message. The crown would not be held hostage by personal rivalry. It would endure through dignity, resilience, and loyalty to the people's trust. Palace aides quickly recognized this shift in power dynamics. They saw Charles lean toward Catherine in council, his words echoing her wisdom, his gestures revealing a newfound dependence on her calm strength. They noticed Camilla's isolation grew as Charles's patience with her anger dissolved into cold distance. Whispers among the staff revealed what the world would soon sense. The balance of power within the monarchy had shifted, and there would be no return to the way things were. But such decisions never come without consequence. By elevating Catherine and diminishing Camilla, Charles set the stage for an irreversible confrontation. The fracture in his marriage had now widened into a canyon, one that threatened to swallow not just personal bonds, but the very image of royal unity. This was no longer about private disagreements, it was about survival, legacy, and history itself. But no royal decree is ever final, because Camilla, defiant to the end, is already plotting her most shocking counterattack. If Charles believed his warning would end the war, he underestimated the woman he married. Camilla, cornered and humiliated, prepared a last stand that could unravel everything, including Catherine's rise, Charles's authority, and the monarchy itself. Defiance had always been her armor, and surrender was a word Camilla refused to understand. Even after the king's thunderous warning, she refused to bow. To her, retreat meant erasure, and erasure meant the end of everything she had fought for. Instead, she doubled down, refusing to be written out of the crown's future. Her fury, once confined to private whispers, now hardened into a dangerous resolve. This was not a woman ready to accept her diminished place, but one determined to claw her way back into dominance no matter the cost. It began with desperate alliances. Camilla reached out to sympathetic courtiers, confidants who feared Catherine's growing influence and worried about the shift in royal power. She sought to rally them quietly, building a fragile coalition that might help restore her grip on the monarchy. Some whispered promises of loyalty, others kept their silence, but the very act of mobilizing showed how far Camilla was willing to go. This was not merely defiance, it was rebellion, and in her rebellion, she revealed just how dangerous she could be when pushed into a corner. Rumors soon spread that her revenge would not stop with whispered plots. Palace insiders feared she was preparing to target Catherine directly, either through carefully crafted narratives designed to damage her reputation or by orchestrating incidents meant to humiliate her once more. The thought of Camilla unleashing such venom filled the halls with dread. Catherine, the very image of calm, now found herself standing in the crosshairs of a woman who saw her as the embodiment of everything she had lost. It was a battle not of equals, but of survival, and Camilla was prepared to play without mercy. The looming threat of scandal hovered over Buckingham Palace like a storm cloud. A single leak, a single misstep, could throw the monarchy into chaos. Camilla knew this, and she was not afraid to wield the possibility like a weapon. She had survived scandal before, clawed her way out of the ashes of public hatred, and she was prepared to do it again. This time, however, the stakes were higher. Now it was not just her own reputation at risk, but the fragile stability of the crown itself. Palace aides grew increasingly fearful. They whispered of a collapse that could not be contained, a breakdown that might tear apart what remained of royal unity. For the first time, even those closest to the throne admitted they did not know how the standoff would end. Would Camilla's fury finally break the monarchy, or would Charles's loyalty to Catherine hold strong against the storm? The answer remained just out of reach, but one truth was undeniable. The confrontation could no longer be avoided. The stage was set for a royal showdown unlike any before. Not a quiet quarrel hidden from the public, but an open battle where loyalty, power, and history itself would be tested. The crown, so often presented as eternal and unshakable, now stood on a knife's edge. Every move, every word, carried the potential to tip it into ruin. And so, as the dust settles on Charles's final warning, the world waits because the battle between loyalty, love, and legacy has only just begun. This is not the end, it is only the beginning. Behind gilded walls, a war is raging. King Charles has issued his final warning, but Camilla's fury and Catherine's silent strength promise a storm still to come. The monarchy now teeters on the edge of collapse, and the next move could change history forever. The fractures within the crown are no longer hidden. They are carved into its very foundation. What began as whispered tension has grown into a visible rift, splitting not only the royal family, but the institution itself. Charles's decision to side with Catherine has solidified a new axis of power, one where the future is tethered to her dignity, while Camilla is left isolated in her rage. Yet with every step Charles takes to defend Catherine, the monarchy pays the price of division. Its image of unity unraveling before the world's eyes. Charles now stands firm at Catherine's side, not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. He sees in her the resilience that can carry the monarchy beyond his reign, a calm strength capable of enduring even the darkest storms. His choice has been made, and though it has cost him peace within his marriage, he clings to the belief that it is the only path forward. But that choice has consequences, because every time Charles elevates Catherine, Camilla's silence grows heavier, more dangerous, and more calculated. For Camilla, revenge no longer comes in loud fury, it simmers in silence. Those who know her best describe a chilling calm, a refusal to admit defeat, a determination to strike back when least expected. She has vowed, in her own way, that she will not be erased from the crown's story. And so, her silence becomes its own threat, an unspoken promise of retaliation that leaves the palace trembling with uncertainty. The world, meanwhile, watches with breathless anticipation. Each appearance, each subtle interaction between Catherine and Camilla becomes a spectacle dissected by millions. Public sympathy clings firmly to Catherine, who now carries the title of the people's queen in everything but name. Yet the fascination lies not only in her rise, but in the danger that shadows her. The sense that something far darker waits just beyond the horizon has captivated the public imagination, leaving them waiting for the next explosive revelation. And that revelation may come in the form of scandal, because history has shown that the monarchy rarely breaks quietly. Rumors swirl of secrets waiting to be exposed, of betrayals too great to remain hidden. It is no longer a question of whether a scandal will erupt, but when. And when it does, it may not only shake the crown but bring it to its knees. The truth is haunting in its simplicity. Only one queen will remain standing. Either Catherine's silent endurance will carry her into destiny, or Camilla's defiance will tear the monarchy apart before that future can ever arrive. The battle is no longer about marriage, or rivalry, or even love. It is about survival. And survival comes at a cost. And as the palace gates close tonight, the world waits to see, will Charles's warning be remembered as the moment the monarchy was saved, or the spark that finally destroyed it? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.